I'm going to do some very basic real estate cash flow modeling. You can use an apartment complex as an example. Keep in mind that this is very basic, and we're just going to look at a summary of the cash flows in this one and not do a great level of detail on how those cash flows roll up. We'll use those items in other examples as we get more and more in depth into analyzing real estate as an investment opportunity. Okay, well, let's begin by setting up a basic spreadsheet in Excel, and we're going to look at an apartment complex, and we'll give this guy a name, and we'll call this Beverly Apartments. And the first step in any income producing real estate property, typically apartments, office buildings, retail, is determining what's our total income going to be, what's the rent going to be. In apartments, that's normally a function of the types of units and the number of units that we have of each type and the rents. In this one, let's use 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms as our the types of units we have. We don't have any 3 bedrooms or studios, and I'm going to try to point out some just basic Excel tips as we go along for those of you who aren't Excel experts or have ever used Excel at all. So I'm just moving around these different boxes, or they're called cells in Excel, and as I type, it saves that information, and I'm going to put in here the quantity of these types of units, and let's suppose that we have 120 1-bedroom units and 150 2-bedroom units, and let's suppose that the market rent for these is $675 a month for our 1-bedrooms and $950 a month for our 2-bedrooms. But let's also figure that 6 months into the year, from now forward, or about 6 months from today, we have rent that is going to go up, and this is already in the leases. This is not our expectation of what we think market rent might do. I mean, obviously it is, but we've already built this into the leases that are current leases. Most of them already have this in it, except for a few that we'll mention in a moment. Now let's say that the rent is going to go up by $20, and I'm going to just call it the 6-month increase. It's going to be $20. So to do this formula in Excel, I'm just going to say equals. I'm going to move over here to that other cell and say plus $20. And we'll say it goes up by the same $20 for both types. And we're going to have some vacancy in each of these. And our vacancy, let's say that we have 18 units vacant in our 1-bedrooms, and let's just say 15 in our 2-bedroom units. So what would our total potential rent be? Starting from today, we know that we're going to have 6 months of rent on all of our 1-bedrooms, 121 bedrooms at $675, and then we're going to have 6 months of rent at $695. So let's figure out what our potential rent is for our 1-bedroom units. And that is going to be, we'll do the first 6 months, and we will multiply simply our 120 times our first 6 months rent. And how many months was that? 6. So $486,000. And we're going to do the same thing for our second 6 months. I'll go ahead and I'm going to move this over here so it's underneath that other column. And then we'll do the same thing, but instead of using cell C4, which is the rent for the first 6 months, we're going to use cell C5. And in Excel, we're going to use cell D4. In Excel, I can change this from an absolute reference to a relative reference, so that if I were to drag this column along, it will automatically move this box over, but I don't want it to move that one. I want it to stay on that one. So what I'll do is I'll press the F4 key, and I'll lock that column B by continuing to hit F4 until there's a $ in front of the B. That way when I drag it across, That B will not change, and then I can drag it down and it will change correctly. So as I pull across here, you'll notice that I have 6 months times the 120, and we still have the 6 months times the 120 times the 695. Now I can take those two cells and I'm just going to pull those down with that little box in the corner, and you'll see what the formula does now. It does our 152 bedrooms, and this one does our 152 bedrooms at the second 6 months rent. So if I just get a sum of all of these, and in Excel I can use the sum formula, equals sum, and just highlight these cells here, and that'll give me my total rent for the first 6 months. I can simply drag that cell over and it'll copy that formula. Now I have the rent for my second 6 months, and I can also use this key, this button right here, which is my sum function, and I click that and it automatically tries to guess what I wanted to add up, and I add up these two rows here, or these two cells there. So what I have is rent for the full year, scheduled rent of $2,714,400. Be a little easier if I format these as dollars using that little button right there, and if I want to get rid of some of those decimal places, I can use the decrease decimal button right there. A little easier to read. So we have potential gross rent. Our potential gross is right there, which is what I would get if they were all rented. Well, but let's suppose that I have a number of units that I have rented that are rented at a different amount, and these were ones that had previously been rented, and they are going to be for some period of time at either above or below the rents that I have scheduled. So let's do that with our one bedroom. And let's say that we have 23 units of our one bedrooms that are rented for 3 months of this year. You know, there's going to be 3 months. These are carryover leases from before that are rented for only $650. And in our two bedrooms, we're going to have, let's say that I've got a full 50 units that we were running a special maybe, you know, a year ago, and we had them rented out for $850. And let's say in both of these cases it is for 3 months. So this is going to mean that we're not going to be collecting our full rent for those periods, that we are going to be losing a little bit of what we think we could have, what would have been our scheduled rent. And this is a concept that we use primarily with residential properties, apartments and the like, and we just need to account for that. It's called the loss to lease, which means that we could have in some cases we could have rented for more than market. We could have some leases and then rents maybe have gone down in the area, so we still have some carryovers, and this would be a plus. But let's look at what this would mean to us, and we're just going to calculate the difference in the rent for those 3 month for that 3 month period. So we're going to say it's going to be 3 months times the difference between the scheduled rent and the actual. And since it's only 3 months, we only have to worry about this first 6 month period. So we will say the 675 minus our other amount. And we're going to need, just to make the formula work correctly, we're going to need to go ahead and put our parentheses around that so the order of operations is correct. And that is going to be the amount that we lose per unit, $50. It's the difference, $25 times the 3 months. But we have 23 units, so we need to go ahead and multiply that by our 23. So that's only $1,725. And then we can do the same thing for our two bedroom. We have 50 units, and they are being rented for $100 less than they would be scheduled to for a 3 month period. So that's $300 per unit times the 50 would be $15,000. The nice thing about doing this in Excel is we can change and model these. Let's say that it was 100 of our one bedrooms rented at below market, and that would be a $7,500 difference. So now we have our loss to lease is going to be the total of those two columns. So we have $16,725. We now need to figure out a cost for our vacancy. So it'd probably be good to go ahead and title some of these. And then vacancy losses. And we'll go ahead and scroll down here a little bit. And let's take a look at our vacancy losses on our one bedrooms and our two bedrooms. And in Excel, I'm just going to copy these two cells here and paste them down there so we don't have to keep typing those same things over and over again. So we have vacancies of 18 and 15. So we can also, I'm going to point to those cells, so if they ever change up here, they'll change down here correctly. So I put an equals in Excel. I'm going to point to that cell and press enter. Do the same thing here. I could just drag that down and it will copy that for me. You see 18 and 15. If you look at the formula, it just says equals E4. If you see, I have E and 4 is the name of that cell. So we have our vacancy there. And when we have our vacancy properly calculated, what we will have is another loss number similar to what we have here. And it's going to be comparable to what we had before, which is there's going to be a vacancy loss for both of those 6 months periods. So we know that our vacancy for 6 months is $675 a month and $695 a month for those units. So let's do something very similar to what we did in the potential rent area. If you recall, we used the potential rent, which was our quantity times our rent times the 6 month period. We're going to do a very similar calculation here. In fact, we can do it exactly the same. We're going to say equals our 18 units. And if you remember, we want to go ahead and lock that in. I'm going to use my F4 to lock in that column B. Multiply the 18 times the rent. Let's do that again. Equals our 18. I forgot to put the times or the asterisk, which was our multiplication symbol, times the rent, times 6. And we have 72.9, and we use that F4 to make that, lock that column B in. So because of vacancy, the 18 vacancies that we have is costing us for that first 6 months almost $73,000. Pull that over. The second half of the year, those 18 vacancies are costing us about $75,000. Pull that down and we can see the cost for our two bedrooms. So our vacancy losses, we use that sum function in Excel to put the total for these two items, and I'll pull that across and it'll give me a total for that column. And then I can take this formula, Control C to copy it, just paste it, and you'll see what it did is it actually just copied that same formula, but it used the cells down here. And because I had the dollar formatting, it went ahead and brought the formatting down here as well. I can highlight these cells and also quickly change it to dollar formatting there. So we can see here, let's go ahead and change our formatting there to dollars. Oops, I'm going to get rid of those decimals, not add to them. So our potential gross rent is $2.7 million. Our loss to lease is only $16,000. Our vacancy loss is $320,000. All right, now that we have our potential gross income, our loss to lease, and our vacancy loss, we can calculate our net rental income. That's simply going to be potential gross minus, and I'm just typing the minus in there as I look at this formula, and I'm clicking here, and then I'm going to press the minus key again, put a minus in there, and then click on the vacancy loss. So now we have our net rental income of $2.376 million. So now what do we what else do we have going on? Let's suppose that in this apartment complex we also collect from the tenants a fee for utilities, for electric and water and so forth. Let's say that that's a flat fee of, let's say, $100 per rented unit. So let's call that our recoveries. And if it is the total number of rented units, we're going to look at our sum is going to be these units minus our vacancies. So we will look at the sum of these two cells here, and then we will subtract the sum, I'm typing the word sum, of, we'll go back down here, and the sum of those. So if you look at the formula, I'm adding up the number of units we have total, and I'm subtracting the total number of units that we have that are vacant. And this is pretty easy because we're assuming the same dollar amount for every unit, and it's the same for the full year, so I didn't have to do anything more complicated than that. So what we have there is the total number of 237. Well, but what we have to do now is multiply that by the 100, and then that was per month, so it's 12 for 12 months. And we need to put some parentheses around here to get the math working correctly again, otherwise it's going to do that multiplication operation down here first before it does that subtraction. So we have a $284,000 400. Now what we may want to do in a case like this is allow us to change that dollar amount from 100 to something else just for modeling. So I'm going to put 100 in right here, and over here I'm going to, instead of using this 100, if you look at the formula bar up here where I'm working, I'm going to just point to that 100. Now it gives me the same result. I get rid of some of those decimals, but now I can change that. If it was only $50, then you can see it goes in half to 142,200. It's $100. It's 284,400. So that gives me a quick, easy way to do my recoveries. Now let's suppose that we also have some other income, and we have a laundry facility on site, and a Coke machine, and a few other things like that. And let's say that we get $175,000 a year of income from that, and make all this pretty by putting it in a dollar formatting. So we have our other income, and finally we have operating expenses. And we have our operating expenses. Now operating expenses can be done any number of ways. In this case, since we're just doing it at a very high level summary, we may just come up with a dollar amount of operating expenses, and let's just say that for our rented units, in this case, let's say that we have operating expenses of $375. So what we can do is use the same formula that we used up here, but instead of using these recovery amounts, this recovery amount of 100, we'll just use 375. So let's take that formula, and remember we had these were pointing to these cells here, the vacancies, and then higher up to the other, but if we drag that formula down, it's going to just pull these boxes down too. I'll show you what I mean by that. If I copy that and paste it there, and we take a look at that, see, everything's pointing to the wrong place. And I also want to move this box over here because I'll put that 375 in a place where we can see it so it's not hidden behind this operating expenses word. Now if you recall, that 375 goes right there because I moved this purple cell reference right there. So let's put our 375. So we have operating expenses of $1,066,500. All right, well, so that's great. We have our income we have our recoveries, we have other income, and we have our operating expenses. So how does this all tie into net operating income? Well, it's simply what's left over after we do this simple calculation. And so let's do our net operating income. And if you recall, net operating income is going to be net rental income. And we're going to add our recoveries, and we're going to add our other income, and we're going to subtract our operating expenses. So I've highlighted this so you can see the formula: net operating income plus recoveries and other income minus operating expenses is going to give us our net operating income. Now we may want to look at our, and this is a lot of times what will be used for valuation of properties, NOI, and if we cap that or divide that into a cap rate or a discount rate that we think is related to the risk of this type of property, we can come up with a value of the property. For example, we might, if we want to, if this is a pretty risky project and we want to value this, we want a 12% rate of return, we would simply divide this project into that 12%, and we would have a property worth $14,748,000. There are some other expenses, so we really would get down to really what would be a net cash flow. Again, this is not net operating income, this is net cash flow, but we did have to maybe lay out some additional money this year. I'm going to get rid of this formula there. What other expenses maybe we would have had, and one might be some just expenses for cleaning the apartments up between renting, kind of a recurring expenses, but again not related to just the actual operations of the facility. And we could have recurring expenses, and then we may have some maybe things that we don't expect to happen very often, but maybe we had to make some major repairs to the roof. Major repair of the pool, and let's go ahead and load those in there. Let's say that we had the recurring expenses were $225, and the non-recurring expenses, let's say it was a really big one, $500,000. We'll highlight that as a dollar amount, and we'll get rid of those pesky pennies, and then we'll come down to our net cash flow. And this is our net cash flow for the year. Obviously this doesn't include debt and other things that may have been related to financing the project, but this gives us a good idea. So let's come up with our net cash flow is going to of course be our net operating income minus, and we'll just sum those guys up. I could have also just put E29 and E30 in there, minus each of those two values. That would have worked perfectly well, but I want to make sure you guys are seeing some of these formulas over and over again. So we come down to a net cash flow on this particular project of $1,044,815. Okay, well I hope that helps give everybody an idea. Keep in mind this is very, very, very basic. We would obviously have an entire rent roll showing every one of these tenants, what their rents are. Most likely the leases would be rolling over every month, and lots of different lease rates. We may also have lots and lots of more detailed expense categories that we would load in here that we would use. But this is the basics, and this should help at least get you familiar and get you comfortable enough to start building your own spreadsheets. All right, have a great day.